Do you think you could have been nonviolent with that kind of pressure on you? How many think they could? Pretty tough when somebody beats on you. What do you usually want to do? Get them back. And the instructions, when Martin Luther King began his campaign, he said, we have to be nonviolent. Because using the Gandhi philosophy, that's how he was able to bring down the British Empire. Did not retaliate. The British Empire, they were shooting and doing all these things, and finally they did not win. So was Martin Luther King successful? And all those people who followed him? Yes, he was successful. Who was the president of the United States then that dedicated his administration to right the wrongs of segregation? Yes.
President Barack Obama?
No, not yet. No. Barack wasn't even born. Yes.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy or Lyndon Baines Johnson?
Kennedy did not. Kennedy was, he was reluctant to pursue it because he was concerned about all those Southern congressmen. He didn't want to offend them. And actually it was his brother, Robert, who said, we need to start doing something about our civil rights. So it was not John Kennedy. And so who was John Kennedy's vice president when he, okay. Lyndon Johnson. Although it's during Kennedy's administration when Martin Luther King did the March on Washington, right? And you've heard of the dream speech? What did he dream? What was in his speech? Yes. Up there. I'm looking right through you. Where? Somebody in gray, I guess.
That black people and white people, could merge together and become one mankind nation.
What did he say about children? What did he say about children? Hold hands and they will be judged on their character, their color. Yes.
Judged on not by the color of the skin, content of character. I dream that my little black girl is played like.
It sounds so wonderful. Yeah. And that's great. So what do you have in America today? You have, theoretically, integration, don't you? So when John Kennedy was assassinated and Lyndon Johnson became the president, what did Lyndon Johnson do? He became responsible for what? Anybody, just speak out.
Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, he dedicated his administration to civil rights. And let me read you some of the things that resulted. You probably have done this already. But here were some of the civil rights laws that were passed. Civil Rights Act of 1964. This law barred discrimination in employment, as well as allowing people to have their right to go to hotels, restaurants, and other public facilities. And here's another very important part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The women's liberation movement came up. When was it that women first got to vote? Yes.
1929?
No, earlier. 1920. 1920. But they had to vote, but there were a lot of things that women were denied the right. You didn't have, have we had a woman president? Huh?
Who's had a woman vice president?
Oh, boy. That was a close call. You're rough, you're. That calls for another discussion on another day. Civil Rights Voting Act of 1965. Throughout the South, for the most part, there was black people were not allowed to vote. They were given literacy tests. You know, they'd have a big jar of jelly beans and tell those black people how many beans are in that jar. If you don't put it right on the literacy test, why then we can't grant you the right to vote. They had poll tax against them. They had all kinds of things. Well, this was eliminated with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And then, in 1968, was the fair housing. Blacks were forced to live, remember I told you when I first went to Denver, came here to Denver, we were forced to live in 5 Points. And even after I had married, there had been some movement, but it was contained mainly in East Denver. So, at the end of 1966, we bought a house in southeast Denver. Well, it was all white. Interesting, a telephone call came. One of our neighbors who called and said he wanted to come over and talk to us. So my husband said, "Oh, do you suppose he's going to welcome us to the neighborhood?" Wrong. He came over and he wanted to know if we were put there by the NAACP. What is the NAACP? Yeah.
National Center for
Association
National Association of
for the
Colored
National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Black people used to be called colored. Well, it's a civil rights organization. So he said, well, you must have been put in there as a plant by the NAACP. Well, signs started going up in that block. In fact, the people on the corner, I don't know whether that man went to bed after we moved in, because he was gone the next day with his family on the corner. The one who came over to visit took him a while to get enough money so he could move. Then there was another one down the street. That this lady was a German refugee. And she stood at the end of the block and called my kids all kinds of names. She's a German refugee, but she didn't think that black people had the right to live anywhere they wanted. Then there was the school busing. Now remember, I told you I started out as a teacher. Well, 14 years I didn't teach. I had 3 children and I stayed home and raised my family. So, and my husband had gotten a grant to study at the University of New York for a whole year. So my family and we moved to New York. And this is 1963, and so when we come back, 1964, of course, is when all the legislation is being passed. When I come back, I apply to teach in Denver Public Schools. Why, this time they said, oh yeah, we have a contract right for you, blah, blah, blah. I was hired right on. Because this is now, we're righting the wrongs that went on. Plus the fact that Denver Public Schools before would not hire women if they were over 35 years old. They could only get a substitute contract. Well, I was 36, but by that time, remember, in the Civil Rights Law of 1964, there to be no discrimination on women. So I lucked out twice. Being black and female, I was allowed to teach. practice my profession.
5 minutes again.
5 minutes? Okay. Oh, she's so good at this. I can tell you're in drama. Well, that's kind of the juxtaposed life that I had at the same time as Martin Luther King. And I might add in closing that because of Martin Luther King, these are the kinds of things that benefited me personally. Now, I did not go out and I did not march, but these are the things, because Martin Luther King did what he did, I was able to really define my teaching career. Public accommodations were available to me. I could go and stay in any hotel, travel anyway, without being denied. I was able to buy a house in an area that I chose to buy in. I was able to see blacks in Congress of the United States representing me that had not been there before. Able to see the first black president of the United States be inaugurated. And above all, I was able to see my children realize some of those things that Martin Luther King talked about in his dreams. Thank you very much.